Welcome to another episode of the Cost Management Center podcast. I am your host, Dwayne Deason, and I have a great guest today. I have Keith Norris. He is the CEO of KPI Fire. He has an application and his team has documented over $2 billion in savings. And so obviously that gets me all teary-eyed. He is the host of KPI Fireside podcast, and he is also an author of Firestarter, How to Ignite Improvement. Welcome, Keith.
Hey, Dwayne, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited. Now, Keith, I always start each podcast with letting the audience know a little bit about yourself. And I see your background. You have started with your roots in some real estate, then you got into software development. And where did continuous improvement, which is a big theme of yours, where does that come from? How did you catch on fire about that?
I mean, if we go way back, I think continuous improvement is just a core value for me. When you hear words like growth mindset and being an achiever, that probably resonates with me. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur really my whole life. So started my first business in high school, I think, like making stuff for lawn ornaments. So I've been kind of an entrepreneur all along. Got into software about 20-something years ago and just loved software. I loved the opportunity to work with so many different companies and people. One of our first major successes in the software business was working with the Franklin Covey organization to take the time management methodology behind the planner to an online edition known as Plan Plus, and evolved into the business improvement and more enterprise software with KPI Fire. And that's really where my focus has been for the last 7-8 years, is helping a lot of large companies, just not that we don't like to work with small ones also, but large ones is where you just can have a great impact on these business outcomes. And I find it to be tremendously rewarding and fun and engaging, because I get to work with so many great people who are making significant impact on the products that we all use every day. We have a lot of emphasis in the manufacturing arena, so it's fun to come across products in the grocery store when, we've seen the improvement projects that help those things come to market.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love the idea that it's what can help a company actually can also help you as an individual. So if you have a mindset of continuous improvement, it's something that you can carry over into all aspects of your life. So I think that's a great theme. So we're going to get into your platform a little bit and into the details here, but I always like to start at the top. And one of the things that I've read about and heard about from your different podcasts and writings, that you believe it starts at the top. And I think that leadership aspects and culture is a huge part of every organization. And I want to kind of start there because it's a little bit of a pain point for me. Many times I think I go in and leadership and culture is always an issue, and the leadership can be the hardest to change. So how do you usually tackle that? How do you usually approach it? Do you find that I'm consistent is that they are oftentimes have to change their own mindset to improve a company?
Yeah, culture is a topic that I have spent a lot of time thinking about, and I have some very particular thoughts about. I'll start with just a definition of culture, which I really like. That's really simple, is the way we do things around here. So in a company, the way we do things around here varies from company to company and from leader to leader, but that's probably the simplest definition that I've come across. Now, within that, I've been a student of a lot of different methodologies over the years. I mentioned, the Franklin Covey, the time management methodology, from personal productivity, things like David Allen's Getting Things Done as a productivity methodology. And then more recently, things like Balanced Scorecard and OKRs or Lean, Six Sigma. So there's a lot of these methodologies. And I think that what those methodologies tend to do is put some labels on a way of thinking that helps a group of people have a bit of a shared vision around the way we do things around here. So the culture of an organization, sometimes you'll see sometimes they'll just buy into a particular thinking, like lean, this is a lean organization. And that's a methodology that has a whole bunch of meaning behind it. But even if you've got something like a very common methodology like lean, there's still every company is at a different place in their evolution. So that's one of the things I find most interesting about working with companies. And I think that a lot of times people underestimate the differences between organizations at where they're at in the path. Like I see a lot of people who maybe leave one company, go to another company, and because their old company did things a certain way, they assume that that's the way that it's done. And the truth is that there's thousands of little decisions that leaders need to make about how we're going to do things around here that you need to spend time on, and that becomes part of the culture. And tying it back to the cost savings piece, like that is something that has to be part of the regular rituals that you build into the structure of the organization, to avoid, nothing makes me sadder than to hear these like thousands of layoffs at such and such company, because it just feels like, oh man, somebody just didn't get ahead of that. Somebody didn't figure out how to make the improvements that they needed to at the right time.
And how do you impact leadership with that? So you go in there and this is how we get things done, and you talk to leadership about that. And during that process, you find that, admittedly, they don't always do things well. I go through various aspects of my book about you have by crisis management type of management teams. You have management teams are very easily distracted. You have some that are just visionaries and don't know how to be doers and how to get into it. How do you introduce that to them in an effective way that they actually not only hear you but are willing to make changes? Because the hearing part is actually usually not the hardest part, but trying to get them to actually take meaningful change that will ripple into the culture of the company. I have not always been successful in that.
There's a few frameworks or mental models that I tend to turn to quite a bit. There's 7 strategic goals that, with our work with KPI Fire, we work with a lot of companies. We see a lot of strategic plans, and every strategic plan is unique and different in its own ways. But there's 7 like very common themes that we see in those. And, within those 7 themes, and I can get into that in just a minute. I mean, growth is definitely one. Almost everybody has a objective of some kind to grow, either revenue or profit. And then the other one is what I would describe as like cost management or improve EBITDA. And then you've got things like, improving culture. Everybody wants to have a great place to work. You've got, improving like customer outcomes. That, of course, is a good one. You've got legal regulatory compliance. That's always, part of the portfolio. Sustainability is in some companies a bigger priority than others. Reducing risk, particularly, if you're an insurance company, of course, most of what you do is about reducing risk, right? Yeah. And then the last one, which sometimes gets blended into the other ones and this is where right now AI fits, right? Everybody has an AI initiative, but I would just call that innovation. Like, how do we make the business better? So another kind of model that I think of a lot when it comes to strategic planning is every leader has basically 2 buckets to put things into when it comes time to create a new strategic plan. These are the things we're going to maintain, and these are the things we're going to try to improve. And depending on your role and where you sit in the organization, maybe you're up to your eyeballs in just maintaining the current state. You might be 95% focused on just the maintaining stuff, but some people in the organization need to be thinking about how to improve. And one of the things I like to say about leadership in general is the number one job of a leader is to make things better. So at the top of the organization, that starts with somebody needs to set a target. Like how are we going to make the business better this year? And again, a lot of times that falls into those 7 areas. Depending on the size of the organization, you've got a lot of different things that you can choose. The most popular one, the easiest one to measure for any CEO is, did you grow revenue? Did you grow profit? Right? Like that's the easiest way to measure. Everything else can drive that. And that's probably one of the areas that I sometimes wonder why companies don't do a better job of setting those targets, even if they don't know how they're going to get that $3 million in bottom line improvement. Put the number out there. You can find benchmarks in industries, and depending on where you're at is, what % of total revenue should you be trying to improve? If you just set that number and put that number out there, and share that number with the different departments and places in the organization, that's probably one of the simplest things, is just set the target, come up with a number.
I love that the number one responsibility of a leadership is to improve the organization. I think that's very meaningful. And I think a lot of leadership, they get so caught up in their tasks where, you have a CFO that thinks, maybe financial reporting to the SEC is their number one, or creating budgets or those type of things. They don't think of it that way. And if you break it down, it kind of helps them to realize that they have to be part of the solution. I really like that. That's
I love that maintain versus improve, because, without somebody pushing us, like, how are we going to get better? I think it's just human tendency to kind of like get lulled to sleep with, like, this is my routine, and this is probably more a challenge for certain personalities than others. There's certain personality types that really like the routine and the rituals. As we talk about some of the best practices that I see across organizations that, we mentioned the $1 billion in savings that we've helped participate in, these companies that are generating the savings, we're not necessarily doing the work. They're just using the software to help keep track of it. So they're doing the hard work, but there's definitely some success patterns that I see repeated. And one of them is that they start with a number. They have a number. Sometimes it's $1 million, sometimes it's $5 million, sometimes it's $50 million, in terms of business improvement savings. And then they typically will break that down at what we would call just a department level. Sometimes that's a business unit. Sometimes that's a cost center, depending on the organization. And then they go to those organizations and say, hey, this is a number we think we can get. And sometimes that's very well informed. For example, a CFO in a company with 5 different plants that are all making the same thing. If you see one of your plants that has, like, maybe an electricity cost that's way outside of everything else, you can look at that and say, hey, why are we spending twice as much on electricity in this plant versus somewhere else? And you find out that, oh my gosh, we're using 30-year-old bulbs in our plant, to just consume a ton of it. So that's one thing that's really nice in bigger companies particularly, is you can start to see these differences across similar plants. So that's one of the simplest places to look for cost savings. And that's something that usually the finance department has some great visibility into. And they can go to that plant manager and say, hey, we think you could save $200,000 on electricity costs because we've got 4 other plants doing the same thing with similar productivity numbers, and they're spending a lot less. And so you can kind of give them some hints and some direction. Another one are things like just cost of poor quality scrap and rework. These are some areas where you can, quickly find some real improvements in cost as well.
You couple of things there that just trigger thoughts and questions that I'm not sure which to prioritize, but I want to stay big, and then I'll get down to a little bit how you calculate savings and hard savings versus soft. But first I want to stay a little high level because you did also mention about the size of a company. And is there some aspects that you see a lot whether it's different culture and their different ability to change in larger versus smaller? Maybe I know you have some international presence as well, so you see different cultures internationally that are more able to accept change and continuous improvement versus other places that are not so much. What's your experience?
If you're in an organization that hasn't had much change, and then all of a sudden you come in and you've got some new consulting organization or some leadership change that comes in, and that's a lot of times how it manifests, right? The company was acquired, or there's a new CEO or new senior leader somewhere, and everybody kind of gets on edge. So that can be a time for a lot of disruptive change. What do they say? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think even if you're in an organization that doesn't really have a well-structured improvement program, I think that this is that lesson to every leader. I mean, if you're a leader, everybody I've ever talked to wants to get paid more money for what they're doing, right? Yeah. And the only way, when you look at the dollars and cents of how that all works out, the only way to pay the people that work for you more money is to grow the pie, right? You've got to grow the size of the business. You've got to improve productivity. You've got to, there's so many ways that you can improve the business. Even if you can't increase revenue, you can reduce cost. And so I think that's actually a responsibility that every leader can take some ownership on. I mean, of course, if you're in a very big company and the CFO says, hey, we need you to save X hundreds of thousands or X millions of dollars from this P&L that you're responsible for, like, you've got a target. But I think that's just a responsibility of a good leader, is like, do the math. What do you cost the organization? And are you making the organization better every year because you're there? And, that I think that mindset is one that it's good for job security, really, particularly in a time where, there's a lot of uncertainty about jobs and whatnot. I think the people that are at least thinking about, hey, what's the value that I bring to the organization and how can I make sure that I'm bringing more value than I did before, is just it's a good mindset.
Oh, I very much agree with you. It's very helpful. And then what about, so let's do that little dive down, because you, back to that one point I made earlier, or a question I had earlier about, hard savings versus soft savings and how you help a company measure that, because sometimes you can, one very identifiable and measurable savings can ripple and be 3 or 4x when you consider the full impact of that. And so maybe explain that a little bit more to the audience.
First of all is have a savings target. And then some things that you do to improve the business have different categories, different ways that you can measure the impact. So the way I tend to think about things is there's like 3 layers of benefit that any business improvement project can have. And the first one is a financial impact. Like if you can just reduce the cost of something, that's immediately drops to EBITDA. That's a brilliant improvement. Usually if you can increase the revenue without also increasing the cost more, that's usually a pretty good thing. So financial is always the simplest way to justify an ROI. Hey, this thing's going to cost us $10 and it's going to make us $100, or this thing used to cost us $2,000. Now it's going to cost us $1,500. Those are the easiest things to say yes to. They're the easiest things to put on your resume to celebrate a win for. Mm-hmm. Then below that, you have a layer that I think of, I just call them key operating metrics. They're not necessarily the financial parts, but they're the things that drive the financial. It's the lead time, productivity, it's the cycle time. It's just it's culture, it's customer satisfaction. It's all the things that really drive the revenue and the cost inside the business. And then the third layer of project benefits that I think of are just what I would call enabling projects, things that you just have to do so that you can do those other things. So I tend to think of things in those 3 buckets. A lot of the people that use KPI Fire and some of the best practices in the organization, when they make a business improvement, the thing that I would say as a standard that I see across lots of industries and lots of companies is this idea of a 12-month window. So if you're going to make a process improvement, some of that benefit is going to start accruing as soon as you make the improvement, and some of it's going to take some time. Some of those benefits are going to stack up. The best practice that I can share confidently with anybody who's saying, hey, how do we value these improvements that we're making? If you look at a 12-month window on most of those improvements, that's the standard. That's what most companies will do with process improvements. If you're saving $100 a month or $100,000 a month, value that for 12 months, call that the improvement. So that's where I'm talking about with this idea of savings. Every sort of process improvement work that you do, there's a way to calculate the savings and put it into a dollar. And some of those savings are going to be hard savings. And I would describe hard savings as something that really quickly shows up on your P&L or your balance sheet. It improves working capital. It improves cost of goods. It improves productivity. Maybe you need less variable labor hours to get those things done or you get that service delivered. And then the other thing is going to be soft savings. And, there's a lot of conversations. We have a very popular post on our website about hard versus soft savings that, people can go look at, because there's no shortage of discussion about what is hard and what is soft savings in different industries. And I think that soft savings are just the amount of time that you give it before they show up in your financials. Because you could say, we have some customers that are in the mining industry, and some of their really important metrics have to do with stakeholder relationships. For example, some of these mines are on indigenous lands where you've got to maintain healthy relationships with the people that own the lands or external stakeholders. You can get away with having some negative externalities in your business for a little while, but if you continue to do that for a long time, absolutely, the threat of shutting your company down is very real. That has a big impact on your P&L. So the difference between hard and soft savings is really just how short of a time frame you have between where those costs start to come into your business. And I mean, if it's going to affect your P&L in the next year, that's a pretty good line that I would say for hard savings.
That's great insight. So let's talk a little bit about how you get started with a company and your app and your application and how it benefits a company.
Sure.
Is there a standard methodology and client process that you go for every client, or do you have to kind of customize it? And so just talk a little bit about how you get started with a company and then where your application comes into play.
Yeah, sure. So KPI Fire is, we would describe it as strategy execution software with three main elements: line strategy, drive execution, engage people. The ones that are the best fit, I mean, every company needs to have a strategy. Every company needs to have business execution rituals, monthly reviews, weekly reviews, that sort of thing. And hopefully every company is involved in finding improvements from people closest to the action, sharing ideas, working projects through structured problem solving. The places where we are really focused right now and where we have like the fastest ability to implement and make a difference is typically like larger manufacturing or mining companies that have multiple sites where they do have a specific number that they've set. We want to save 10 million. We want to save 25 million. We want to save 2 million. And they come in with a number, put that number in, assign that to the departments, and set up some key operating metrics depending on the department that they're in so that they can, keep an eye on various metrics. And then KPI Fire has a feature we call the idea funnel. So the idea funnel is this place where anybody that you open it up to in the organization can hopefully be trained on what to look for in terms of cost savings opportunities or what to look for in terms of waste. Waste is always the first place to look for where can we save? Where are we spending money that we don't need to? You don't want to take money away from things that are driving value, but most often it's just the things that are wasteful. So for organizations that have trained people to look for waste, which we find it goes really well with like a Lean Six Sigma methodology established, where they are doing some training, with like yellow belts and green belts, where they're teaching people in the organization what waste looks like, what inventory buildup, what that means to the organization, why having huge piles of inventory waiting is not a good thing, why having long cycle times is not a good thing. Because a lot of times, a lot of the business improvements can be focused on those areas and make things better. So, and again, I would say that in a typical implementation with KPI Fire, because we have this idea funnel, there's this opportunity to collect ideas and then turn those ideas into projects, run those projects through like a structured problem-solving approach, and then identifying the financial benefit. So not every idea that comes in is going to turn into immediate financial benefit. In fact, one really funny one that I saw in an idea funnel was change the bathroom fan. Like, okay, like that's probably not a cost savings advice. Maybe that's going to improve productivity, but maybe that's just productivity a little bit better, right? Like, we probably would describe that as a just do it. Like, yeah, that's more of a maintenance request, just do it. But when you start asking people for ideas, they'll come up with all kinds of ideas, and some of them are brilliant and some of them are terrible. One of the ideas that we featured on our website was a simple idea that Walmart implemented around changing the height of a step stool. And, their math on this thing was the time savings. This was, probably soft savings. The amount of time where they were able to increase productivity was a $30 million impact over changing the number of steps that they had on a particular piece of equipment.
Uh-huh.
So it's like, depending on the organization, big organizations, little changes can have, a bigger change, but every little improvement counts. And when you teach people to look for waste, as part of the culture, and you make those questions part of the routine and the rituals that people go through, you give them opportunities to spot that waste and you build that culture. So hopefully you can avoid finding yourselves out on the plank, where you've been not improving for so long. Now it's, a major layoff or something is required to get back on track.
You talked a little bit about kind of importance of setting some goals up front, and I think financial ones at that. And we also talked a little bit about the idea that almost human nature is at some point is just a kind of the status quo becomes the accepted norm instead of continuous improvement. So, do you find that, and once those goals, financial goals, are set, that you have to have a carrot and a stick kind of approach, where, because if not, does that mundane and routine type of thing, and in all fairness, a lot of time employees are just damn busy, and so the idea of introducing another responsibility that they have to take of this cost management project or this initiative is overwhelming to them. So how do you encourage, if you will, employees to really invest in this?
When I think about like my core beliefs, I believe that everybody who starts a new job today starts with the intention of being successful. There's very few examples of people that take a job knowing that, I'm waiting for a better job, and I take a job and then I get the other offer. Sure, like maybe that happens. But I think most people that take a job are optimistic that this is going to be the best job ever. Nobody wants to take a job that's worse than the last one they have. Very few people, depending on where you're at. You might take a job that pays less than one that you had in the past, depending on the situation. But everybody comes to that job that first day thinking, I'm going to be great at this. This is a great fit for my skills. And then over time, sometimes that gets just worn out of people. I mean, you look at the polls of like worker engagement, and this is an area where I get pretty passionate and excited about the work, because we spend so much of our lives at work. It makes me sad to see people who are like disengaged or don't enjoy what they do, because it just feels like such a waste of human potential, really. So I think that it's really the leader has the responsibility to set the targets. And again, I know that plenty of the businesses that we interact with are very serious, and life and death is a factor. But I think that it's a leader's job to help make the job, I would almost say like gamify, like make it fun. Like if you know what success looks like, I have not met very many people that I would like to work with on a regular basis who don't have this common pattern about their day. They like to come to work knowing roughly what's expected to them. They like to have a plan, a goal, like maybe it's a number. Hey, if I close these sales, if I ship these items, if I deliver this many hours or whatever, like I have some idea of what success looks like. I also have some autonomy in what the way that I can do the work. I mean, people don't love like you have to do it exactly this way and being told exactly what to do. That kind of beats down the human spirit. And then they love to go home feeling a sense of accomplishment, and having numbers, having metrics, having targets to hit is a key element of just having a good day. Like who doesn't love to go home at the end of the day feeling like you, not only did you hit that target, but you beat it by just a little bit. One of the questions that I ruminate on from a philosophy perspective is it more important to be successful or feel successful? And I think that's, I mean, if you have one but not the other, that's like, gosh, you're really missing out. So hopefully you can find that magic spot. And I think that's where leadership has such an important job in setting targets. And the target could be, inputs, it could be outputs, it could be cost savings, giving somebody a target to shoot for. That's why games are so fun, right? When you start, big difference between keeping score, playing, pick the game, right? Whether it's pickleball or pick up basketball or whatever, like having a score just helps us keep our attention a little bit more.
We're competitive creatures. Interesting. Your application, it sounds like there's two core, and I want you to expand on this if I'm understating it. Two core aspects of it. One is that you are tracking all opportunities for continuous improvement, and then from that you evaluate which are your priorities, what it would take to invest in the company, resources. You do all the planning once you capture these ideas and continue to track the progress within your application. And then the second one, it sounds like, is where you do KPIs, the performance metrics, all those other type aspects. Are those the two core principles within your application, or is there
basically
more to it?
Yeah, KPI Fire, I would say there's three main pillars there. One of them is what we call goals, and the goals are like, what do we want? So, and then those refer basically to those 7 goal areas. So for a lot of companies, growth is like the overarching theme. And so we would say, okay, this company has a priority on growth. Then the second question we ask is, how are we going to measure it? Because growth is a great strategic alignment,
Yeah.
But how are we going to measure it? Are we going to measure revenue? Are we going to measure profit? Are we going to measure number of customers? Are we going to measure number of employees? Like, there's so many different things that you can measure. So you've got the goal. What do we want? The metric. How are we going to measure it? And then KPI Fire has projects and ideas. So an idea is just the seed of a project. So the project is, how are we going to get there? So you've got a goal, you got a metric with targets inside of it, and the project is the work that you're going to do to close that gap. Because again, I asked this question, the maintain versus the improve. A lot of people, if you do your budgeting based on, okay, we're going to do the same that we did last year in this area, then I would say you're strong in the maintain side of things.
Right.
Maybe you just need goals and metrics. These are the metrics we're trying to maintain. But when you have an improvement objective of some kind, and again, I've looked at enough of these strategic plans to, the way I sometimes to describe it is like you go to see the doctor and you're kind of nervous about this bump that you have on your back. You don't want to show anybody. The doctor's like, hey, I've seen it before. Just, show me.
Right.
So every company that we've seen has goals and metrics and targets. And a lot of times they love to call them SMART goals, but they fit into one of these 7 buckets typically. And, the best ones have metrics that they measure with targets that are set incrementally, and then a set of projects. And the project is where I think by defining things as projects, the pattern that I see is that's where you get to unlock the human potential that exists inside organizations. And of all the forms of waste that there are, a lot of companies have high cost of poor quality and lots of scrap and lots of rework. But the number one form of waste that I see in every organization is the underutilized human potential. And having a structured problem-solving approach where people in your organization can have a model to follow of what it looks like to identify something to make the business better, and then have like a structured plan to follow. We would call that a project plan. And then a framework for how to communicate that in terms of business metrics that matter to the organization. Then that's where this idea of culture comes in, where you create this culture of continuous improvement. You're recognizing people for their ideas. You're recognizing and rewarding them, whether it's financially or just in terms of, peer recognition that they're making an impact and making a difference. I mean, who doesn't love to make a big impact in the work that they do? That's just something that I think even the people that don't have jobs where they feel like they're making an impact, I believe they wish they did.
Now, in this, because we talked about, you said most underutilized resource right now are your people, and I see that a lot as well. And now AI, almost every conversation and has to include that now.
Yeah.
So where does AI come into play with in your mind in this, both from a standpoint of having employees, how employees use it and how your application uses it, and is it something in this the sense that could be a catalyst to continuous improvement? What do you find AI's role in all this is at this point, and where's
AI is such a hot topic right now. I think AI represents a huge shift in pretty much everything. So for folks that are involved in continuous improvement as a discipline, or project management, most of the big AI implementations are going to come through some form of project management implementation. So I think that AI represents a lot of, I guess I'd say, job security for people who are involved in, business improvements. The other thing that I think about with AI, recently there was some news from a consulting organization that said 95% of AI pilots failed to deliver results, and everybody loves to cite that evidence. And I'll tie this back to that kind of 3 layers of benefit for a project. The best place inside your organizations to look for AI to have an impact and to be able to say, hey, here is where AI made an impact, is in that cost savings. There's so many people that have great ideas inside of organizations, but oftentimes, more often than not, the best ideas might not get given the go-ahead because they're just not packaged in a way that the executives that can say yes to things or can allocate a budget it sounds good, but they're just not, it just hasn't been structured in a way that makes sense. And one of the examples that I love to share is, let's say I'm a plant manager and one of my, staff comes in and says, hey boss, I've got a great idea. We could save $100 a month on our electrical bill by spending $100,000 on this new air conditioning unit.
Right.
$100 a month, $1,200 a year, and you want to spend $100,000?
Yeah.
Get out of here, right? So that's coming with the idea.
Right.
If you come with the problem, why is this an idea? This is what it might look like they lead with the problem. Hey boss, we have a little bit of a problem today. The air conditioning unit went out. It's 120 degrees Fahrenheit inside of our shop. The fire marshal's here and they've sent everybody home. We're completely offline until we get this air conditioning unit fixed. I found a new one. It's only $100,000 and it'll get us back producing, by tomorrow. Okay, go do it.
Right.
So that's just a little lesson of leading with the problem versus leading with the idea. Lead with the problem when you're trying to, communicate the story to get the executive approval or the manager approval for this new idea that you have.
So you have the application. If people use it, it will work. But I find a lot of times that you almost have to hold their hand in order to make sure people use it, to make sure that it is being followed up on. Is a lot of your practice about supporting the application once it's with a company, or supporting the company to make sure that they follow up on these type of things? Or is it really that you train just a few people within the organization to try to manage that so that I guess they're teaching themselves how to fish, if you will?
Yeah, I love the teach them how to fish analogy, because I think that's a very, very useful one. Where we're at right now as a company, we do tend to focus on large organizations that have some form of an established business improvement function. Sometimes it's called Lean Six Sigma. Sometimes it's called Project Management Office. Yep. Sometimes it's called business improvement professionals, but it's usually some centralized function responsible for implementing business improvement. Sometimes it's called Performance Management Office. And the reason that we tend to focus with them is because, we're still a relatively small company, but we like to work with folks that can add the ritual part, the accountability part to the monthly ritual. So for example, there's some behavior patterns that we strongly recommend when we do an implementation with a company, we'll look for certain things to be in place. A lot of times, if you're having some sort of a weekly business review meeting or a monthly financial review, those are good things where KPI Fire can just be a few minutes on the agenda, so it doesn't have to be like a separate meeting necessarily, maybe during implementation. But once you get rolling, it's just like, hey, we look at these metrics during this weekly business review or this daily huddle, and we ask the question, what improvements can we make? And the model that I think of, all of these improvements fit into, kind of three tiers. And the top tier is the one that gets the most attention from cost savings. So the lowest tier is anybody can say, hey, what can I do better? And there's plenty of stuff that you as an individual probably could just do to improve your workspace, just to improve stuff that only needs you or maybe your team to get on board with doing. And so those are the little things we'd call those just do it's, right? Like just do it. Just make that thing better. Just make that improvement. Then you've got things that are at this middle tier where it probably requires a little bit of coordination with people within your department, within your work cell, within your business unit, whatever level of responsibility you have. If you're the CEO, then everything probably fits into that bucket where, but if you're a plant manager, a line manager, a work cell leader, a team leader, you have certain discretion where you can make improvements, but you just got to get your team on board. And then you've got things that need to go up where it either needs an approval or maybe it needs budget, like you need to get somebody senior on board. And so those are the ones that tend to have more dollars. And that kind of shows up in organizations with things like budget approvals, like, hey, if you're going to spend more than X dollars, you need to, get approvals from multiple levels up.
That is very helpful. So I want to turn the kind of questions around because there's always times where I have lots of things that I could continue to talk about, but there's important things that you might want to know to say or things that are great points that I might not ask a question to trigger. So I want to turn it around a little bit and just say, are there certain things that are worth discussing or that you think that we should cover on this when we talk about continuing improvement, anything from that range on to your application, anything within the whole spectrum that you think that the audience might be interested in?
One, set a target. I can't tell you how many times I see like these vague targets like, hey, we want to cut costs by 3%. But nobody goes and turns that into a dollar amount. Like, if I'm responsible for a work cell, don't make me do the math of what 3% is. Like, tell me that you need me to save $1 million. Like, give me a number. That's probably one of the things that I either see no numbers shared, that's really sad, or everything's just totally bottom up where you see things. So, but I like to see a target set. So X millions of dollars, in most companies, how much improvement do you want to see? Probably the other one is just asking people closest to the action, what ideas do they have that can contribute to that number? I mean, even as I sit here and give this advice, I've been guilty so many times of assuming that the people that report to me might not have the ideas and I need to be the one with all the ideas, right? And that just, like, I've been humbled so many times and learned that lesson so many times. That's probably one of those that just never ceases to teach, is just when you think that your team isn't capable of coming up with those brilliant ideas to solve the problem, like, show them the problem and ask them for their ideas. 'Cause that's a lesson that just continues to teach all of the time.
Great thoughts. I think you've given the listeners and the audience here just a great insight into why continuing improvement is critical. And I really intrigued by your application on how organizations can utilize that. I've been part of and listened to your podcast. I encourage listeners to go to that the KPI Fireside, outstanding production. You've had some great guests. Anything else you want to promote or mention before we sign off?
Yeah, well, if anybody's interested in seeing more about the software, you can check it out at kpifire.com. We've got a podcast on the subject as well, KPI Fireside. And Dwayne, for anybody that might come from this podcast, if you do request a demo, or if you think something like that could fit with KPI Fire, mention that you came from Dwayne's podcast, and I'll send you out a copy of the book here, the Firestarter book. This is basically the handbook on how to build a continuous improvement program and system inside of your organization. So it stands alone completely, or you can use it as you're implementing the continuous improvement program inside your own company.
I love it, Keith. Thank you. It's a great discussion, and I appreciate all the insight.
You bet. Thanks so much, Dwayne. Thanks for having me.